Welcome to Offstage with Jordan Baylor, where you'll discover the stories behind the movers and shakers in the entertainment and business world. Now here's your host, Jordan Baylor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Offstage with Jordan Baylor. In today's episode, I had the chance to speak with Lucia Klestincova, a woman who simply wants to change the world, one person at a time. Now, Lucia is optimistic, a force, ambitious, and extremely charming. So it's no wonder why she's a politician. In our interview, we discuss how she got her spot as an EU leader and the positive mindset it takes to want to bring change about through politics. Now, in the interview, I learned how European politics works and what it actually takes to bring about real change. It starts with you simply wanting to make change. It's so simple, but that's the answer. You have to make the decision first and then begin to act. So without further ado, I bring to you my interview with Lucia. Hi, welcome to another episode of Offstage with Jordan Baylor. We have on the line EU policymaker and host of podcast Lights on Europe, a series which interviews thought leaders and experts from Europe, hailing all the way from Brussels, Belgium. Lucia Klestincova, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's so good to have you as well. I always like to ask the first question, who is Lucia?
Wow, so Lucia is very passionate about transformation of European leadership. I've been working with European policymaking for many years, and I've become very passionate about exploring how attraction of new leaders, new skill sets, new ways of looking at what we can co-create can transform what kind of European Union we live in. So this passion that brought me on the path of exploring running in politics, running my own podcast, building a coaching practice for people who want to become European leaders in the European policymaking world. So yeah, there's a lot around European policymaking and empowering leaders and young talents.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a lot to juggle. That sounds like a lot to juggle.
I guess that's where the self-exploration comes in, that you hope that over time the pieces of the puzzle start falling together. That's what many of the gurus say, just keep on exploring and eventually you will reach it. So
yeah, it's the journey to find yourself. I understand that.
Totally.
I've heard a lot, I've heard like a lot that's going on with the world. It's basically a world quarantine, lockdown, and all the bad with Corona between the deaths and the job loss and the world economic stagnation. But on the flip side, do you feel like there's been any good that's helped with policymaking or politics in general?
Well, actually, yes. I don't want to downplay the pain that this quarantine has brought on people, and it's been very challenging for many people out there. But actually, yes, I think there's a lot of very useful reflection and slowdown and healing that this period has brought to all of us. So we hear many people sharing about how they've reconsidered their careers and business models and how they exchange with the world and the planet also. I think that's the best effect for all of us, that we actually stop destroying the planet for a while. But when you're asking about policymaking as such, I think the biggest transformation effect that this quarantine had on policymaking as such and all the large organizations is that it has massively accelerated the transformation of the workplace. And so overnight we basically had to get comfortable with home office for tens of thousands of people, roll out digital solutions that would have been in the making for a while, basically rethink how we produce policies and legislation without being able to be together face to face. So I think this will have massive impact on all large organizations, including policymaking and legislative world, where we've had to be kind of exploring new ways of looking for policy solutions in impossible times, where within a week or two we had to generate policy solutions for this kind of pandemics, which we've never seen before. So yeah, I hope that this will be one of the effects, that we will be going back to large organizations which will help operate in different kinds of ways.
I think that is 100% true. I think I agree with everything.
And frankly, one of the things that pops to my mind now, it's also
Mhm.
that it changed. I mean, maybe you will want to touch upon it later on, but it also changed how we relate to each other in the large teams. Because on the one hand, you think that we are much further from one another because we're no longer in offices and you can't do the small talks, etc., and have coffees. But at the same time, we kind of see each other in much more vulnerable, intimate home situations when we spend our days on those conf calls, and you see people in their living rooms and how they're dressed, and their kids popping up halfway through the call,
Yeah.
or you basically figure out a bit more about who your colleagues are behind the scenes, if it were. And
Yeah,
so
it
I think this
humanizes
has
them.
a big impact. Yeah, this has big impact on the team dynamics as well, and the relationships for the future, I feel.
I agree with that because I saw my manager's two dogs at work, and I was like, oh, okay. Like I just see photos around the office, but I've never seen them like on video. And
Yeah.
yeah, they're just extremely loud dogs. But it was just funny. It was just funny to put like a face to the image of the dogs. Um,
And then you wonder whether their people actually are similar to their animals, as they say.
yeah.
We
It
choose
is true.
animals that are similar to our personality, so you kind of get to know people from that angle as well.
Yeah, you like take on their personality and they take on your habits and they kind of carry themselves like you. Like it's true. It's true. So I had a question with all this going on. It almost feels like it's a little selfish to start doing identity politics at this point. Is identity politics still like a problem in the EU, or is it unifying the efforts of all the politicians and people are just kind of putting them just differences aside?
So tell me, how do you understand the term identity politics?
Well, I understand it like from, I guess, from what I see within American politics. You have like conservatives, and then you have Republicans, and then you have like hardcore Trumpers who would not necessarily call themselves conservatives all the time, but they support President Trump. And then you have like the vilified like left side, you have like the hardcore liberals, and then you have the hardcore Democrats, and there's like different tiers to them, because you got everybody's so fractured. They feel like they're choosing like pockets, and then that's like the identity that they hold on to. Like you have like the people that are staunch Bernie Sanders supporters, but they're not necessarily
Yeah.
Democrats. And then they all just like hold to like their little corner, and then they hold on to it like for dear life, and it's pretty much their everything. And then they don't want to hear anything that basically could prove that their identity is wrong. They just listen to
Yeah.
news that just reinforces that everything they believe is right. And I feel like
Yeah.
social media is making that so much easier for us to just create these pockets and then just listen to these feedback loops of just news and stuff like that, to just constantly say that we're right and our opinion's right and what we believe is right and that Trump is right or Trump is the devil, whatever it is. And I don't know if it's that bad in the EU, but I know it's gotten pretty bad with the whole Brexit situation.
Yeah.
And just the party going on and vilifying like refugees in different countries and people making
Yeah.
fractions of like racist or even Nazis. I heard about Nazis like making a resurgence in Germany and stuff like that, which is pretty scary.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, like, was it instead of the fear kind of making everything worse, is it kind of making everybody being like, you know what, we're all humans, like let's do this racist stuff later? I don't know. What is it doing for the politics?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we've reached that point where the divides, for the sake of divides, were totally ruling the way politics looked, and people were almost more interested in hearing who we're against than listening to the solutions.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's gonna be also one of the positive things of the pandemics now, that people are almost united because of this life and death situation, that it feels like the political divides are less visible because we are all basically up for looking for one solution that is going to be equally valid for everybody. And so you would hope that this kind of worldview can be extrapolated to any policy area that you look at. When you're looking at healthcare reforms or education reforms, you would want to have policies that work for everybody, just like the vaccine for the virus now.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's also one of the contextual, the crisis that will then force us to start looking at the politicians differently and not seek the divides, but listen to what kind of values they're bringing to the table. That's actually what I would be hoping for, at least for the European space. When I was talking about new generation of leaders coming in, it's not so much about which can be representing, because you're supposed to be serving the whole society. It's more about whether you're representing the old world of divides or the future, leading through a greater purpose and greater values that can be uniting the society. I don't know if it makes sense, but that's what I would
Wow.
be, wishing for.
Yeah.
That you see,
Yeah, you're right.
leaders
You're
coming
right.
in who are greater than themselves, and it's not about this leader, either sponsorship group that they're representing or their community or whatever identity feature they represent, but it's humanity in a sense. I guess that's a bit too naive
That's
to say, but you see what I mean.
yeah. So it's almost becoming like a pre-corona world and a post-coronavirus world, or COVID-19, whatever you want to call it. But the identity politics would be pro-human versus like pro-money or pro-poor, or whatever.
Yeah.
Wow. I'd never thought
That's
about it.
where this pandemic like makes us all equally vulnerable, and you see top level politicians being dependent on that nurse that they would never, like,
Mhm.
how have we got to a stage of humanity where we pay teachers so little or the nurses so little, and now everybody understands how dependent we are on a person selling us that milk and being healthy, or that nurse taking care of us. And now is the top level politicians who are grateful for their service, who probably will have changed their worldview at the same time. Yeah, we
I
hope,
think
right?
it's humbled society. Like, it's brought it down a notch. It's not like what
Yeah.
you make. It's not about the amount of money you make, or, I can code some cool app. It's like, yeah, that's cool. We need that. But like, nah, man, we need bread more than that. Like physical bread, like, or we need,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I agree with you.
Narrowing it down to the essentials.
Yeah, and people are staying home with their kids, and they're like, "Man, my child is annoying. Maybe I should pay my teacher more." Like people are understanding that the importance of like the little job, or not the little job, but the job that we don't necessarily cast light on. I think that's
Yes.
beautiful. I think that's beautiful.
Yes. Yes.
So, how did you get your start in politics? Was the main goal always to be involved in the political world, or how did that shift come about for you?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I've never been involved in politics, and it's rather been for me a calling to show up more for my country, because I've been living abroad. I'm Slovak, which is in Central Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been living in Belgium, which is the headquarters of the European institutions, for many years. And after years of working on the Brexit process, trying to contribute to shifting the way we communicate, trying to get involved a bit more here and there, I felt before the European elections were coming up that my next place is not to be in Brussels, but it's actually in my country, to show up a little bit more for how European Union is communicated and presented, and how general public understand it. Maybe just a little parenthesis for those who don't understand. So European Union has kind of multiple governance institutions, and one of them is European Parliament, which is directly elected by citizens in all EU member states. And so it's almost like a local elections of politicians who then represent your country at the European level. And so I basically took myself out of my career of European policymaker for a while in order to be present on the ground in my country, walking the streets and talking to thousands of people there, trying to understand what is it that they wish for as future of European Union, what are their issues, what is it they get, what they don't get, how do they feel as citizens of the EU, because we know that one of the reasons for Brexit or the other extremist situations in Europe is also the fact that citizens don't feel listened to or recognized in the larger political process. And so it was a big self-expression experience for me, trying to come up with communication that is gonna be relatable and authentic enough for people to want to show up in the elections, because that's also one of the big challenges in my country, that people don't feel inspired enough, I guess, to show up in the European elections. So we have very low turnout rates.
Oh man.
So that was one of the reasons for me as well. Yeah. So everybody who's listening, if you're nudged to get involved with the European political process in one way or another, I'll be happy to share my experience, because it's never an easy decision. In particular, when it comes to women, that's also one particular space that I'm involved with. How do you attract more women into politics? And it's a very, for some painful, for some dangerous, almost decision. It's very intimate and makes you very vulnerable in the process. So I'd be happy to pass on the experience if anybody's asking themselves the question, if that's something that could be their next place of contributing to the public space.
Wow, that was I like that. I like that answer a lot. That was very humble of you, to summarize your whole life like that. Yeah. So before the coronavirus hit, what was the most important political issue for you, or what were you working on before this problem came about?
Oh, so I work in one of the European institutions in the area where we support competitiveness of the businesses. So that is working on business environment, industrial policies. And so I was involved a lot with how we support European entrepreneurs with preparing for the Brexit process, because the value chains across the EU are hyper integrated, as it is in the US as well. And so that was one area of my involvement. And then I also work on equality policies, because this is the first time in the history of the EU that not only the European Commission, one of the main institutions, has a female president, Ursula von der Leyen, but also we have a commissioner, one of the top European politicians, who's in charge of the equality policies. So we've created this little team of people who are trying to make sure that equality as a value is reflected in all policies that we produce. So that would mean, for instance, even now when we're coming up with solutions for the corona crisis, how do we make sure that the solutions work equally for women, staff, nurses, for instance, or seniors who may not have access to equal healthcare treatment, or LGBTI communities, etc. And so disregarding of whatever policy area you look at, if it's industrial policy or healthcare or whatever technical standard you can think of, it's important that we don't only look at it through the lens of the mainstream population, but that we always have in mind the impacts on the people who feel less visible in the process. So I've been lucky enough to support the European Commission in the policies that were looking at gender equality, LGBTI strategies, so all kinds of themes, yes.
All kinds of things. Okay, so you're I mean, this is what I think. So your job is to kind of take policy, European policy, and then filter it. Well, not really filter it, but just kind of see how people could be getting lost in the cracks, and then kind of just bring them up a little bit more in the policy so that they're more visible.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
So obviously with many other people, with big teams, it's not like I'm the one. There are big teams of people working on any issue. But yes, so for instance, take an example of the place where I work at. We also have a space policy. So that would be like really launching space shuttles to the universe, like the American NASA does. And so, for instance, think of how many women astronauts do you have? How many women do you have coming into the space policy and space industry? Who are the owners of the companies who are supplying these government contracts to develop the space shuttles? Do all parts of the society have equal access to these opportunities? These are important questions to be asking ourselves, because we know very well that this is man-made world in a sense, and we all have big bias in how we take our decisions. So it's very probable, and the statistics show that, for instance, certain industries would be very male dominated. This is just an example when you look at the gender lens. And so this is one of my big passions, to to be looking at whether there are some imbalances which are not natural. Obviously, sometimes you have to have imbalances for whatever kind of reasons, but when it's not natural, when it comes to business opportunities which are not open to everybody simply because the decision making is happening in closed clubs of people who have access to power, then it's important that we question that reality and create conditions for movements and groups and social support structures which can slowly empower individuals to break through those walls and be more empowered in creating whatever business or life opportunity that they want to create for themselves.
Wow. I love that. Like that you're challenging the status quo and you're actually questioning, instead of just going along with it, you're seeing the problem and you're going like, how can we change that? Because you're right. A lot of the decisions that affect our lives on a daily basis are made in like dark rooms, like you said, with people that it's probably like 4 or 5 people and it's, benefits them the most, and then, they get all the money or whatever happens. And then you're just kind of like left kicking the shoe down the road, like trying to figure it out. But it's never really a real
and
shot.
It's not wrong that there's representative structures. Obviously, you can never have millions of people deciding because we wouldn't be moving anywhere. So you have to have representation. But it's important to constantly ask ourselves, how do we choose those people and who has access to those opportunities, right?
So you've positioned yourself as a mentor for the youth to get into European politics. Why does that speak to you, and how do you frame the message so it connects the importance of government to the young?
Yeah, so it's not just European politics, it's also the bigger world of policy making. So the administration around it, supporting politicians in preparation of the proposals, the ideas of the programs that the public sector basically creates for the society to work. And basically my passion around it is coming from the recognition of how much do we really need to recreate this as a sector of careers, which normally wouldn't be as attractive for young people out there simply because of the reputation that this sector has on the job market. So most of us would have been working with young people who typically want to get into startup careers and who want to have their self-expression, creative, free entrepreneurial lifestyle, and they wouldn't normally think about going into politics because it's dirty and closed and whatever, or they wouldn't be thinking about going into policymaking and public administration because the reputation there is that it's the most boring, gray, rigid, very kind of formatted kind of world, which wouldn't be respecting enough their need for the dynamics and creativity and variety. And so what I think is important is to recognize that if we want state to continue working, because the state is going to stay and we are going to live in a world of legislation and taxes and healthcare and education, etc., we need to continue renewing this world as any industry out there. And this basically would require young people to be attractive enough for this sector so that we can be selecting out of the best people out there on the market to attract the best people out there to the public sector functions so that we generate the best possible policies for the whole society. And that's why I got so much passionate about not only attracting the best people into the sector, but also taking one step before that, which is almost reframing the way the sector is perceived and being a bit of like an ambassador for the careers in the EU administration and in the public service, because obviously there's reasons for why the roles are there and why you cannot be like super autonomous as if it was your own company. We still have to be accountable to the citizens and taxpayers, etc. It's not like we would be coming up with ideas and redesigning our product every single day the way we would normally be allowed to if it was our company.
Yeah.
But still the opportunities are there for self-expression and for creating your ideal job to the extent possible. And so what I'm big on is helping young people to understand what their greatest passion and talent is, and then how can they package it so that it works within the framework of the public sector, so that it works for them, it makes them happy and fulfilled and self-expressed, and at the same time it allows the public sector to use the best talent out there to be able to react to the massive challenges that we have out there. Is it corona now, or is it climate change, or is it the use of artificial intelligence in our society? For all this, we need the best experts out there, and we cannot risk losing that talent simply because they would think this is not a good enough job for them, because they think it's too boring or whatever is the reputation of the sector.
Yeah, so you're kind of like competing with tech companies that can be sexy and they have the catered lunches, and you have to tell like young kids that are coming out of college, hey, why don't you step into policy making?
Yeah. Imagine that you've studied astrophysics, and you can choose whether you're going to work for Elon Musk or you're going to work for the government agency which is structuring the space program. So it's the same thing for any government job. You have a very sexy private sector offer, which probably offers more money and a nicer workplace and God knows what kind of treats. And so we are no longer in that position as now as I speak as state or public administrations. Maybe in the 70s or 80s, it used to be, the sexy place from which you can change the world because you have much larger space and leverage for impact. Now you can have equally big impact from private sector. And so how, as public administration, do we stay equally competitive to attract the best people so that they don't run off to work for private companies? That's the big question, I think, for the future.
Wow, you just said so much. It kind of blew my mind a little bit. I'm not even joking. If someone, because you have a pretty accomplished career, if someone wanted to follow your career path and they're just starting, or they don't know anything about politics, how should they start?
In understanding my personal path, or how to start with public sector careers? Just
kind of public sector careers. Like they might not necessarily be in Europe. They could be in America, but like how can they, begin to make a difference in their own community?
I think the most important thing is not to overanalyze it and not to be too sophisticated about it, because all of us are going through so many phases in our lives, and most of us have no clue what we're going to be doing in a couple of years because those jobs don't exist yet, or the sectors don't exist. So don't be too harsh on yourselves by thinking that now I'm making that life choice, and the sector that I choose, I'm going to be stuck there for 30, 40 years. So it must be the right choice. And there's no right choice. There's just the choice we are making in that period of our life with the information that we have, and also with the curiosity that brings us to certain experience. So what I believe in is that it's important to know yourself and be doing that inner work and understand what is it that you're good at, which are the strengths that you want to bring to the world to be of contribution, which are the topics that you care about most. Is it human rights? Is it green? Is it artificial intelligence? There's so many problems out there and so few people working on them, that is just the question of making the choice for that period and then creating a structure around you that will help you design the best situation for the period that you're in. So if, for instance, you think that you want to explore careers in public sector, then you can get in touch with me if you're in European Union, or with whoever is your role model in the US, if you're in the US, and start exploring with the people where is the best place and how to get into that careers for the moment. Same if it's politics, same if it's startup, same if you feel called to build your own NGO. I think the magic is in understanding yourself, knowing what do you stand for in that moment, and then surrounding yourself with the role models, with the people who can serve as your inspiration and be your mentors to basically accompany you to do those daily baby steps to develop the job for that period or the business that you feel called to built in that period. But I wouldn't, like create a big pressure around who do you want to be when you grow up. I think there's nothing more, disempowering as a question for young kids, because it puts them in this very scary position of making once in a lifetime choice, which I believe is not a healthy, not an easy position to be in.
I understand that, especially like thinking my career choices from high school to like where I am today. I've had a lot of different careers or tried a lot of different things. So I definitely understand that it's very, very scary, because you're like, am I making the right choice? And you're constantly questioning yourself.
Totally. And so, for instance, when it comes to eucareers now, that's why also I started doing this podcast, which you mentioned, Lights on Europe, where I interview people who either work in the European administration in Brussels, or somehow are around it, or are lobbyists or trainers or coaches, empowering the leaders, the people who are standing for transformation of the European Union. So in the podcast, I interview them to basically shine more light on who they are, what do they stand for, how have they created their life path, what is it that makes them succeed and fail, because I believe that these are the stories that can be very transformative for especially young people out there listening to how easy or not it is to make life choices around building one's career. Because when I put myself in those shoes of many years ago, when I was dreaming of working for European institutions and I had no clue who these people are, I had no access to understanding their personal stories, and not even like go and ask them. It was the times of probably no social media back then. So now we are in that other stage where we have access to so much, but it's almost difficult to navigate that ocean of information. And on top of it, there's very little, I feel, authentic sharing and that vulnerable stories of how much of doubt there is along the way, and everybody questioning themselves and or failing and learning from their own mistakes. So that's why I feel that interviews like those in my podcast can help young people understand what does it mean through our lens, through these interviews, what does it mean to be a transformation leader in European Union and contribute to European policies.
So go listen to the podcast Lights on Europe. Long story short, right?
Yes, definitely. Everybody. And also, once you do, please leave your feedback, leave a comment wherever you're listening, or reach out to me via social media. Yeah, but
if you like it, leave 5 stars. If you don't like it, just go away. Don't leave any review.
And also instead of the 5 stars, invite 5 friends to listen to it, so that they leave also
5 stars
share their opinion.
And invite 5 friends. 5 by 5. Yes. I love it.
But I think it's very important also that you share, as whoever is listening now, that you share your feedback, because podcasting is a very lonely place where you put a lot of energy and love into creation of your content, and you send it out there, and part of that energy comes back, but it's never as much. So I'm always very grateful for everybody who sends me that Insta message or wherever they find me on social media, when they get in touch and tell me whether it resonates, what are the questions they're left with, or what are the main takeaways, or what is it that they would like to hear in the future, because that makes it a more kind of two-way relationship conversation with the audience.
I love it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's very lonely. Who are some people that inspire you?
Wow. So there's many of them come from outside of the policymaking space. Many of them are American. So it's people like Marianne Williamson, who's big on bringing love into politics, or Brené Brown, who inspires us about vulnerability in our conversations, or Gabby Bernstein. There's a lot of thought leaders who bring spirituality into business and politics and self-expression. That's what I'm very because I think that's what we need, at least in European Union. Obviously, I don't want to be speaking for other spaces, but yeah, I'm very grateful for their work, and always very happy whenever I can see them in Europe or listen to their content. So God bless technology now, especially in the times of Corona.
That's awesome. When you were like, I guess like in high school or college, did you see yourself in politics? Because I know you said that you were envisioning yourself in
No, not at all. I was always an activist in some ways. So I had very green period when I was in high school, being engaged with like launching the first recycling scheme at my school, stuff like that.
Wow.
And I was involved a bit with like local. Yeah, now that I'm
you were
thinking
that
about it,
kid.
there
You
was
were
a
like
bit
the
of
Save the Well kids, huh? You were like the, hey, we're putting together school fund and we're gonna do this. You were that kid, weren't you?
Yeah.
What was the
And
shift
then
to be like, make you you know what, I want to make a difference. Like I need to step out and speak for people whose voices aren't being heard, because you come from a place where you don't speak for yourself. You're always talking about other people and trying to be like a megaphone for other people's issues. So you don't really have like a selfish kind of, you know, dissonance around you. You know what I mean? Like you're
Wow,
always
thank
like,
you.
yeah. So I was like, what was that shift for you? Where you're like, you know what, I have to step up and be like the best Lucia I can be for other people.
You know what? I've been asking, because many people ask me this, and I've been asking my parents, like, was there like that little trauma that I forgot about, which you think converted me into this? And they never, you know, were able to pinpoint that moment for me. But I think it has something to do with the fact that I was born in, or I grew up in that post-communist Central Europe when, so I was born in Czechoslovakia, which fell apart in 1999. And there was this revolution, transformation period. And the whole 90s were very identity building in a sense for the whole Central Europe, because we were going through that post-communist transformation into market democracy. And that was my teenage years when I was growing up and listening everybody around me talking about the European Union being the light at the end of the tunnel and the Holy Grail, and how can we make our little Slovak democracy and market, how can we make it work by integrating it to this greater structure, which is the European Union. And so I think there's like deep down, there's this feeling in me of massive gratitude for the people, not only for those who fought for collapse of communism, but also for the first generation of post-communist politicians who were fighting for integration of Slovakia into the European Union. And so every day when I'm at work and I'm sitting in that meeting with like French and German and Spanish and God knows whom, I'm mindful of the fact that, oh my God, like I wouldn't be here if there weren't generations of people before me fighting for our place at this table. And so I think there's this sense in me of almost paying it forward and trying to continue building that legacy, because people are often very critical of the European Union, but they often forget how young it is compared to, let's say, American democracy. And so I always feel that responsibility towards trying to make it better for whoever are going to be the generations after us. Yeah, I think there's a bit of that.
So you have that, you know, you come from an era where you don't take it for granted, basically. Whereas a lot of people might be in your same position. They might take it for granted because it's been like that for them their entire life. But you know what's on the other side. You know the side of communism and not having your voice heard. So you're like, I'm not going to take this for granted. I like that.
Yeah.
I like
and
that.
also the recognition of how privileged we are. It's not like I want to be pretending that I come from God knows where and how hard my childhood was. I at the same time recognize that I've been privileged a lot, having been born in the space of peace and having health and having the love of my parents and having their support in everything that I ever embarked on, in whatever they could have been thinking about the ideas of who I want to be doing with my life. They were always very supportive, and that's a very, very kind of defining feature, I feel, if you're growing up as a child and and your parents tell you that it's just the question of really you working your ass off, and when you put in the hard work you can become anything you want. And so that's a very powerful, I think, almost identity design feature, which then makes you courageous enough to experiment with what you're called to do.
Has there been an increase in voices being heard in the Czech since they transitioned to EU politics? Is it still like dirty, crooked politics as usual? Like, or is it,
Yeah, generally in our space, what I feel has been a big shift, especially in Slovakia in the past couple of years. Slovakia went through a big transformation because of a very tragic murder that happened of a journalist and his fiancée, who was involved in investigation of some corruption related crimes in our country. And so this was a big trauma for the society and a big trigger of civil society movement rising up and people stepping up to express their wish for transformation of the politics. And so this was 3 years ago when people started showing up much more for what kind of values they want to see in politics. And this has brought about a big change, new generation of politicians running in the politics to start with. That's very important, that you see young people coming home, also the expats coming home from abroad and not going into business, but many of them going into politics and trying to lead from a new values space. So yeah, there's hope, or at least I want to have hope. But yes, there is one.
I love it. Sometimes trauma, like an assassination, can either do one of two things to a cause. It can either like deflate it and take all the air out of its sails, or it could revitalize it. And I'm glad to hear that it revitalized
The
it.
only thing is that you would hope that you don't need traumas like murders for this to happen. Yeah. So unfortunately, it had to go as far. Mm-hmm. But it was also one of the triggers for me to show up in the elections, because you then wonder, like, does it really need to get that bad for people to start getting more involved in politics? Or in European politics, does it need to get as bad as Brexit for people to really realize the value of membership? So unfortunately, that's how human mind works, that you only appreciate stuff once you lose it, right? So it's important that we are acknowledging, I guess, what we have before we lose it. That's a big lesson to be learned from all of these experiences.
Humility. I love it. I just got one last question for you, Lucia. How can the people get in touch with you?
So you've already tried to pronounce my name. I have an impossible surname to remember. So it's Lucia Klestincova .eu. So it's LuciaKlestincova.eu is my website. If anybody is still listening at this stage, there's all links to my social media. Please get in touch. Send me a message on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever you find me. There's a new YouTube channel also with a series of interviews. I'll be also putting all my podcasts there. Look up Lights on Europe on Spotify or your iTunes podcast, wherever you're listening. And just please get in touch. Let me know what your thoughts are and whether I can support you in any way in your journey of being a more active, conscious, values-based leader, be it in the US or the EU. I was supposed to be in the US now. Unfortunately, that was called off. So I might be back in October this year. So maybe I might even meet some of you.
Nice. Well, I'd like to tell you that we admire you for your humility, your work ethic, and your clear message of trying to help the youth. And that is extremely commendable. Doesn't matter what your values are. And
thank you so much. And thanks also for the opportunity to have me. It doesn't happen so much, this kind of European-American exchange in the podcasting world. So I really appreciate it anytime somebody reaches out from across the pond to bring a bit more of the European conversation into the US.